I do think it's interesting, though. I mean, here's something in Fox News published just a couple of days ago. It's got Bret Baier on the byline, and he's no out in front, at the cutting edge of the news type of guy. I mean, he's definitely a lead from behind kind of news guy, in my opinion. And I just wanted to read this first line to you because I think this is really fascinating that now this is the news story, and this is as of, basically Friday of last week. There is, and I'm quoting, there is increasing confidence that the COVID-19 outbreak likely originated in a Wuhan laboratory. That's the first line of the story. There is increasing confidence. Now we're confident about it. I didn't even know we were allowed to talk about it. When did that change? All of a sudden, you're not only allowed to talk about it, but now we have increasing confidence.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, and then it goes on, and it's not just Americans and American interests that are talking about this, because I also thought it was pretty interesting. If you've ever heard of the German newspaper Bild, it's a pretty big newspaper over there in Germany, and they actually ran an op-ed piece written by their editor-in-chief, and it's called What China Owes Us. And I think it's fascinating. You read some of what he wrote there. He says, I'm quoting, this is the German editor-in-chief of Bild, says, your government, talking to the Chinese, says, your government and your scientists had to know long ago that coronavirus is highly infectious, but you left the world in the dark about it. Your top experts didn't respond when Western researchers asked to know what was going on in Wuhan. You were too proud and too nationalistic to tell the truth, which you felt was a national disgrace. You rule by surveillance. You wouldn't be president without surveillance. Can you imagine saying this to?
Who's saying this?
This is the editor-in-chief of a German paper, The Bild, who is saying this to Xi Jinping, the emperor, essentially, of China. He says, you wouldn't be president without surveillance. You monitor everything, every citizen, but you refuse to monitor the diseased wet markets in your country. You shut down every newspaper and website that is critical of your rule, but not the stalls where bat soup is sold. You're not only monitoring your people, you are endangering them, and with them, the rest of the world. And he goes on, because that wasn't the entirety of the article, but we see there, again, the seeding of, and we don't know what happened. We don't know where this virus came from. We're just trying to follow the evidence. But
Will we ever?
Well, we see the seeding of that story again, that it somehow came from bat soup in the wet market. Now, remember that particular wet market, of the original 41 people who were studied by the Lancet who had this Wuhan virus, the coronavirus, of the original 41 people, 14 of them had zero contact with the wet market. So it's actually thought that the virus didn't come out of the wet market, but that it went into the wet market and infected people there at the wet market, and then kind of spread out from there. So now that particular wet market is not very far from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, we don't know for sure that somebody was going there and visiting, although you can look on the internet, and there are people who are named as being some of the researchers that were involved in this bat coronavirus program that they were running out of that lab, the one we were telling you about last segment. And they even have identified, some people have identified on the internet, and of course, again, we have to say we don't know if that's true or not. It makes for interesting reading, though, but they've identified somebody in particular as being patient zero, the very first person who got it. And, how could you possibly go about getting it in one of these research laboratories? Well, if they're not following safety protocols, like the U.S. Embassy reported back that they weren't back in 2018, or their equipment is defective. And that's another interesting thing. I mean, there's pictures out there that you can go out and find of the seals on the refrigerators where these viruses are held. And the seals are not, they're broken. The seals are not in good shape.
No quality control there.
Yeah.
Let's say we found out concrete evidence it came from China. Without a doubt.
Well, we know it came from China.
But we figured out how, guaranteed this is how it happened. China still wouldn't admit it. And what would it cost China?
Well, yeah, what are we going to do about it, right? What are we going to sue them? And
we won't pay back our debt?
No, well, wouldn't that be nice? Debt jubilee.
Do we still have a timeline of when this was supposed to have first, the patient zero. What's the hypothetical timeline of patient zero in Wuhan, China?
I think it was late November, although I've seen timelines going back as far as September of 2019.
Okay.
I mean, the answer is we don't really know because China has not identified a patient zero who's the first person who had it. That'd be the natural first thing you would do when you're investigating this would be try to, okay, where did it start? Let's find out the very first person who got this and spread it to other people. But they have not done that, or if they have done it, they've kept the information secret. They haven't shared it with the world as to who they've determined was patient zero. So without that knowledge, we can't say for sure when it was.
I just Googled, and it says the first signs of the coronavirus began on December 31st. No, not
That's
true.
not accurate.
Not accurate.
No.
But that's Google for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely not accurate. And then, of course, you got questions about, and you got to have questions. And I guess what I would, look, we only have an hour a week, so we can barely even scratch the surface on a lot of this stuff. And with the way the news cycle moves, it's hard for us to even talk about things that are a week or two old. But it's important when you're viewing the news to try and maintain some perspective out there and try and remember a little bit of history, remember what's come before it. That's why I'm pointing out things like the shift in the story, like how in January when Zero Hedge came out and said, you know what, this probably came out of that Wuhan Institute of Virology. Here are the people who were working on that particular kind of coronavirus, et cetera, and they were decried the internet over for daring to post these crazy conspiracy theories. And by the way, that word just gets used now for everything. I hear that everywhere. Any story that doesn't agree with the accepted narrative is a conspiracy theory, and that's just baloney. It's not a conspiracy theory just because it doesn't agree with the accepted narrative. But that's the way they use the term. That's the pejorative use of the term, and I'm sure you've all heard it out there. I mean, we see it all the time now. We see that term thrown around, and it's generally just to discredit whatever thought process. And, I don't think it's very fair the way that people aren't allowed to think for themselves and apply their common sense. Well, I say they're not allowed to. You can do whatever. Thankfully, you can still basically do whatever you want to do. They haven't quite totally locked us down yet. But in terms of freedom of thought, you can still basically do whatever you want to do. But the media and all of the inputs that you're looking to on these issues discourage it heavily. And you have to kind of swim against the current mentally. You have to have the fortitude to say, I'm not going to think the way that you want me to think. I'm just going to think about this. Doesn't mean I have to accept it, believe in it, etc. But I'm going to think this thought through. And I'm going to apply my own common sense, my own judgment to the situation. And I think, it has to be a balance. Because the situation that we've gotten into is sort of the tyranny of big data, or the tyranny of the models, or the tyranny of the algorithm, where we're in a situation where you can't question what you're told the big data tells us. Big data tells us this. If you say, well, gosh, that doesn't make any sense to me, you get attacked, and you're not allowed to even think that way. You can't apply your own common sense, your own judgment, your own experience to the situation, and I think that's a real mistake.
As we're having this conversation, I'm trying to find a legitimate time for when this actually started, the real date, and I came across an article that says conspiracy theorists have conjectured that the lab is the origin of the COVID-19 coronavirus. That was less than a month ago, that article.
Well, there you go. You see what I'm saying? Now, one of the things that I saw, and I'll see if I can pull up the article because I had it, and I don't have it right in front of me, but one of the things I thought was interesting was that the guy who actually was the discoverer of HIV, and he was actually awarded a Nobel Prize in Medicine, and I think it was 2008. Oops, now that's going to put us on to YouTube. Okay. Anyway, I think it was in 2008 he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine, but he's actually come out, Luc Montagnier, and I may be saying that with a little bit too much affectation. I don't know. What else? How would you say it? Luc Montagnier? Luc Montagnier.
Luke M.
That's the southern way to pronounce it.
he's come out and said that, look, there is something inserted in this virus from HIV, from human immunodeficiency virus, which is the virus that causes AIDS. There is something from HIV inserted into this COVID-19, this coronavirus, and this could only be done by a lab. So this could only have happened in a laboratory setting because nature doesn't do these type of insertions. That's from somebody who, talk about appealing to authority or appealing to experts. He should know what he's talking about. He discovered HIV and won the Nobel Prize for it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.